Hello, my name is Paul Gosling and I manage the recommended list for cereals and oilseeds at the AHDB. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I want to give you an overview of the new winter wheat recommendations, for the 2025-2026 recommended list. But before I do that, I just want to give a little overview of the trials to harvest 2024, because they did give us some problems. Like many commercial crops, we had problems with the wet weather in the autumn. We had to abandon several trials over the winter due to waterlogging. Mild wet conditions resulted in high levels of disease, and in the fungicide untreated trials, yields were quite heavily suppressed. Septoria again overcame the RL fungicide program in a number of trials, with the most resistant varieties being the highest yielding, even in some of the fungicide treated trials. Brown rust was at unprecedented levels in some trials, and the candidate varieties were quite severely tested this year. But there weren't any significant changes in the ratings of the current varieties, as the disease pressure is taken into account in the rating calculations. There have been a number of changes to the processes the crop committees used to select varieties this year. These are in response to the RL review that took place in 2022, when you asked us to make some changes. So the importance of untreated yield and some diseases has been increased in the variety selection process. New target ratings have been introduced for multiple diseases, and varieties are expected to meet these targets. If they don't, there needs to be a really good reason to recommend them. Automatic recommendation based only on yield has been ended, and now all varieties will be reviewed by the crop committee. Crop committees will continue to review the criteria they use to select the varieties and adjust them in response to the changing requirements of the industry. And not just every 5 years when we do a review, we'll look at these criteria every year. So moving on to the recommendations. Well, we have another Group 1 milling wheat recommended this year, showing improved disease resistance and high untreated yields. We have 4 new Group 2 milling wheats with good treated yields, and these add options, and an extra Group 2 with BYDV resistance. We have some high-yielding Group 3 biscuit milling varieties, further strengthening this group, and we have just 2 new feed wheats this year. So first of all, we'll look at the bread milling varieties. Our new Group 1 this year is KWS Vibe. That comes from KWS, obviously, as a UK recommendation. Then in Group 2, we have 3 varieties from KWS, Arnie, Ekip, and Newbie, all with a UK recommendation. And also in Group 2, we have LG Sugar from Lima Grain and RGT Goldfinch from RGT, the variety with the BYDV resistance. In the biscuit milling varieties, the Group 3s, we have 2 varieties from KWS. We have Solitaire and Flute, both with a UK recommendation. And in this group, we've removed KWS Briam, LG Illuminate, RGT Wilkinson, and RGT Rashid. In the feed varieties, we have 1 soft Group 4, that's RGT Hexton from RGT with a UK recommendation, and the hard Group 4, KWS Scope from KWS WS. And we have removed Swallow and Stokes from the list. So looking first of all at the new Group 1, what you're going to see over the next few slides are tables that look like this, where we have the new variety compared against some established varieties. These are what we call our comparative varieties. When the committees look at the new varieties, they put them up against the comparative varieties and say, are they better than the current varieties in some way? And if they are, they can be recommended. Also for Vibe, I should say before we go any further, that it's been given a provisional Group 1 status that will be confirmed by UKFM in the spring after they have milled and baked commercial quantities of flour. However, Vibe has been given a Group 1 rating all through the 3 years of its testing, so it does look at a good prospect for being confirmed in that Group 1 status. I should also say that KWS Vibe has not yet been added to the GB and Northern Ireland variety lists, but it has passed all the tests, and provided no representations are received, it will be added in January. But moving on to the variety itself, it has a UK treated yield of 98%, which is better than Skyfall, a couple of percent below Zayat. The East treated yield again is below Zayat, matches Skyfall. The West treated yield at 100% is just below Zayat, but just ahead of Skyfall. And the North treated yield, based on limited data, hence it's bracketed, is 99% ahead of Skyfall, but just below Zayat. In terms of grain quality, Hagberg 283 is higher than the two comparators, so no problems there. And specific weight sits between the comparators just below Skyfall. It has very high protein on a milling specification at 13.2. That is based on limited data, but it is well ahead of Zayat and Skyfall. It's more like what we'd expect to see from a Group 1, so it shouldn't be a problem meeting specifications there. Lodging with a PGR is an 8, the same as the two comparators. Ripening is a +1, so it's slightly later than the two comparators. It hasn't passed the test for suitability for export as a UKP variety. In terms of baking quality, millers seem to like us a lot, so we, as I said, do expect that to get a Group 1 rating in the spring. In terms of disease resistance, Vibe does very well on this count. Its mildew resistance, based on limited data, is a 7, matching Zayat and best in Skyfall. It scores very well in yellow rust with an 8, well ahead of Zayat and Skyfall, which obviously renowned for their poor resistance to yellow rust. Its brown rust is a 6, so it's less than the two comparators, but it's still a good rating. And it has a higher Septoria triticide rating than Zayat and Skyfall, and has the highest Septoria resistance rating of any Group 1. iSpot is a 7, so matching Zayat and ahead of Skyfall. Fusarium is a 6, matching Zayat, just below Skyfall. And with those good disease resistance package, it has an untreated yield of 89%, which is very high, well ahead of the other Group 1s, and one of the highest across all the varieties. It doesn't have orange wheat blossom midge resistance, but then Skyfall is the only Group 1 that does. There'll also be a number of slides that look like this. These are our official variety comments, which will go onto the app and onto our website. I won't dwell on these, otherwise it will be a very long presentation. You can pause the presentation and read them at your leisure. So moving now on to the Group 2 varieties. We have 4 new Group 2s this year, plus a fifth one with BYDV resistance. This time I'm using KWS Extase and KWS Palladium, which are our official comparators to compare them against. So starting on the left with KWS Arne, it has a UK treated yield of 106%, so very high there, much higher than Extase and Palladium, and indeed one of the highest on the list across all groups. East treated yield at 106%, well ahead of Extase and Palladium, and indeed that is the equal highest on the list right across the groups. West treated yield at 108%, again is very high, and the North treated yield, though bracketed at 103%, is higher than both the comparators. In terms of grain quality, Hagberg 287 matches Extase, a little bit behind Palladium. Specific weight just below Extase, but ahead of Palladium. Protein on a milling spec is limited data, but it's 12.1%, so that's just below Palladium. It has a lodging rating with PGR of 7, so the same as Extase, and it's a 0, so slightly later than Extase and Palladium, but not much. It hasn't passed the test for suitability for export as a UKP variety. In terms of its baking quality, it does have lower water absorption, a slightly lower protein, means it is likely to be something of a niche variety, won't suit all grists, and so growers should seek guidance from local merchants before they commit to the variety. Moving now to KWS Equip, 103% on the UK yield, so ahead of Extase and Palladium. 102% in the east, matching Extase and ahead of Palladium. In the west, it's got a good treated yield of 105%, so ahead of both Extase and Palladium, and at 100 in the north, though it's in limited data, that's just below Extase and Palladium. In terms of grain quality, 305 on the Hagberg, which is very good, 79.5 on specific weight, which is ahead of both the comparators. Protein at milling spec is 12.2% based on limited data. Lodging plus PGR is a 7, so the same as Extase. It's a slightly earlier variety like Extase and Palladium at -1, and it has been given provisional approval as suitability for export as a UKP variety. In terms of baking quality, again, like Arne, it has slightly lower water absorption, slightly lower protein, which again means it may not be suitable to all grists, and so growers should seek guidance of acceptability with local merchants. Moving on now to KWS newbie. UK treated yield is 103%, so just ahead of palladium and X days. East is 103%, again just ahead of palladium X days. At 101%, its west yield is slightly below X days and palladium, but it does have a very high northern yield at 107%, well ahead of palladium and X days, but that is based on limited data, and we may see that change. Hagberg is 305, so that's very good. It does have a slightly lower specific weight at 78.4, but that's still ahead of palladium and not far behind X days. Protein with a milling spec based on limited data is 12.5%, so that's good. Has a 7 for lodging with PGR. In terms of ripening, it's a medium at 0, and it has passed the test for suitability for export as a UKP variety. In terms of baking quality, UKFM rate it as a typical UKFM Group 2, so it should have a place in lots of mills. Finally, moving on to LG Shergar. UK treated yield of 102 matches X days, as does its East treated yield at 102. West treated yield matches palladium at 103, and it has a high northern yield at 105. That is based on limited data. We'll have to see if that stays that high. In terms of grain quality, 289 on the Hagberg, so just ahead of X days. Good specific weight at 80.4 and 11.9 on the protein based on limited data. That is a little bit low, though UKFM were happy for it to get a Group 2 rating. They haven't seen those low numbers in their samples. In terms of baking quality, they see it as a solid Group 2. In terms of lodging, it's got a good lodging resistance rating at an 8. It is a slightly later variety at +1, but not very much later, and it hasn't passed the test for suitability for export as a UKP variety. In terms of pest and disease resistance, Arnie has a 5 for mildew. It's bracketed, but it is lower than both the comparators. It has a 7 for yellow rust, the same as X days, 6 for brown rust, the same as palladium, and a 7.0 for septoria, the same as X days. Its eye spot resistance is 5, so it sits between the two comparators. Fusarium is a 6, the same as the comparators. Untreated yield is 87%, which is slightly lower than X days and palladium. It doesn't have orange wheat blossom midge, but then neither do the comparators. KWS Equip has a 7 for mildew based on limited data, a 7 for yellow rust, and a 7 for brown rust. Also has 7.0 for septoria. Eye spot is a 4, which is perhaps its only slight weakness and disease resistance. Has Fusarium rating of 6, and that good disease resistance package gives it an untreated yield of 92%, so that's higher even than X days, and means it will be the highest untreated yield on the recommended list. It doesn't possess orange wheat blossom midge, but then neither do the others. KWS newbie has a 5 for mildew based on limited data, so it's a little bit low, but it does have a 9 for yellow rust, the same as palladium. Brown rust is a 6. Septoria triticite is a little bit lower than the others at a 6.2. That's certainly not a low rating. Eye spot is a 5, sitting between the two comparators. Fusarium is a 6, and it has an 85% untreated yield. Finally, to LG Shergar, a 7 based on limited data for mildew, a 7 for yellow rust, a 6 for brown rust, and a 6.7 for septoria. Eye spot is a 5, sitting between the two comparators, and Fusarium is a 6. Untreated yield is 87, so not quite as high as the comparators. And like the comparators, it lacks orange wheat blossom midge resistance. Again, I won't dwell on these slides. You can pause them and view them at your leisure. So now moving on to our 5th Group 2 variety this year, and this is Goldfinch from RAGT, and it has resistance to BYDV. Because it's a BYDV resistant variety, it doesn't actually have any official comparators within the RL system, but I put it against X days and palladium, which are our normal Group 2 comparators. On yield, it doesn't stack up quite so well against these two. It has a UK treated yield of 89%, East 87, West 90, and North on limited data on 91. Hagberg, it's good. It's just slightly below X days, below palladium, but certainly not a problem at 279. And specific weight is good, ahead of palladium and below X-days. Where Goldfinch starts to score well is on its protein. It scores 13.1% protein. That's more the sort of thing you'd expect to see from a group 1, so there shouldn't be any problem in meeting specification there. Indeed, its overall baking quality is very good for a group 2. It only just missed out on a group 1 due to some inconsistency, but it should provide the right sort of material for millers. Shouldn't have a problem finding space in the market. In terms of lodging, it scores a 7, the same as X-days. It is a bit later than the other group 2s at a +3, and it hasn't been approved for suitability as a UKP export variety. As well as its grain quality, Goldfinch scores very well on disease resistance. It has a 7 for mildew based on limited data, so the same as palladium, a 9 for yellow rust and a 9 for brown rust. It's the only 9 on the list for brown rust at the moment. And if you saw it at cereals this year, you'd know it was very clean and a very high brown rust pressure yield. Septoria triticii is just behind the comparators, but very close to X-days. Eye spots is a 5, sitting between the two comparators, and Fusarium is a 6, the same as the comparators. The untreated yield is 84%. It is below the comparators, but not by very much. And it does have orange wheat blossom midge, which the comparators don't. So that combination of good disease resistance, BYDV resistance, and orange wheat blossom midge resistance means it could be a good variety for those people looking to cut back significantly on inputs, and for end users looking for a nice story, the ability to not use any insecticides might provide a useful niche for this variety. Again, I won't dwell on the variety comments, you can look at those yourselves. So moving on now to the group 3 varieties, we have 2 varieties from KWS, that's Solitaire and Flute, and our official comparators are Bamford, which was added to the RL last year, and Astronomer, which is an older variety now, but it remains one of our official comparators. So looking at Solitaire, yield is very good. The UK treated yield is 107%, 1% ahead of Bamford. East treated yield is the same as Bamford at 106. West treated yield is high at 109. And the North treated yield, based on limited data, is high at 108%, just ahead of Bamford. Hagberg is a little bit on the low side at 179, but that hasn't stopped UKFM giving it a Group 3 rating, to a Group 3 categorization. In terms of specific weight, 77.1, again a little bit on the low side compared to the comparative, it's certainly not a problem. It is a little bit weak strawed though at a 6, so it will need some management with PGRs. Ripening is the same as comparative to +1, and it has been given a high rating for distilling quality. Well, it's been rated as well above the medium varieties, and if you add in both litres of alcohol yield and its high field yield, that means a high litres of alcohol per hectare. That is something that distillers are starting to look at more and more as they consider carbon footprinting. The importance of that is increasing. It's also been given a good milling quality. It's also suitable for export under the UKS banner. In terms of KWS Flute, it's a similarly high yielding variety, 106% in the UK, matching Bamford, 106% in the East, matching Bamford, 106% in the West, just 1% below Bamford, and 108% in the North, based on limited data, just ahead of Bamford. Hagberg is 197, quite a long way behind Bamford and Astronomer, but it's a reasonable level for a Group 3. 78.4 for the specific weight, so sitting between Bamford and Astronomer. Lodging with a PGR is 7, so not a problem there, and it's also a +1 on the ripening, as with the other varieties. It's been given a medium rating for distilling, a higher alcohol yield than some other medium rated varieties, and it meets all the Group 3 standards for baking quality, not a problem there. And it's been rated as suitable for export as a UKS variety. Moving on now to pest and disease resistance. Solitaire has a mildew rating of 6 based on limited data, it's the same as Bamford. Yellow rust of 8, 1 ahead of Bamford. Brown Rust 5, perhaps the only weakness really there, but only just behind Bamford. Septoria is a 6.7, very similar to Bamford. Eye Spot is a 4, a couple of points below Bamford, and Fusarium is 6. Untreated yield is 88%, so just below Bamford. It does have orange wheat blossom midge resistance, which Bamford doesn't. Looking now at KWS Flute, again a 6 for mildew based on limited data, only a 6 for yellow rust, which is below Bamford, a long way below Astronomer, and only a 5 for brown rust. So slight weakness in the rust, but nothing dramatic. Septoria is a 6.2, so just a little way below Bamford, a 5 for Eye Spot, and a 6 for Fusarium. And perhaps those lower rust ratings explain the 80 for untreated yield, so somewhere behind Bamford. But it does have orange wheat blossom midge, which Bamford lacks. Again, I won't dwell on the variety comments. You can read those at your leisure. We then move on to the soft Group 4 varieties. Just one new addition this year. That's RGT Hexton. And our official comparators are Blackstone and Bairstow. Bairstow having just a northern recommendation now after some adjustments this year. So looking at Hexton, UK treated yield is 105%, so well ahead of Blackstone. The East treated yield is 105% as well, ahead of Blackstone. And the West treated yield 104%, well ahead of Blackstone. Its North treated yield is 111%, is very high. That is based on limited data though, so we'll have to see if it remains that. It's just 8 trials versus 34 in the East, but at 111% it is well ahead of anything else on the list. Hagberg is 236, so ahead of Bairstow, not as high as Blackstone. Specific weight is okay at 77, so between the two comparators. It's been rated medium for distilling. It has seen some variability. It's been good at some sites, but it has been given an overall medium rating. Lodging is a 7, the same as the comparators, and in terms of ripening, it's a +2, the same as the comparators. Moving on to disease resistance. So it's been given a 6 for mildew, based on limited data, same as the comparators. A 7 for yellow rust, so it's a bit behind the comparators, but not a disaster. And it's a 5 for brown rust, again, just below the comparators. But it does have about a Septoria resistance rating at 6.8, clearly ahead of the comparators. Eye Spot is a 4, Fusarium is a 6, but the untreated yield, 80%, it's very close to the comparators, and it does have orange wheat blossom midge resistance. Again, I won't dwell on the variety comment. So finally, we move to the hard group 4 feed wheat, KWS Scope. And for the hard group 4s, Champion and Beowulf are our official comparators. But I've also put KWS Dortmund in here, as obviously it has a dominant position in the market. So first of all, looking at UK treated yield, Scope is 108%, so 1% ahead of Champion, 3% ahead of Beowulf, and well ahead of Dawson. East treated yield at 106% matches Champion and Beowulf and is ahead of Dawson. And its West treated yield at 111% is the highest on the list, and it's ahead of Champion, ahead of Beowulf, and ahead of Dawson. North treated yield is bracketed, so limited data, it's just ahead of Champion, about the same as Beowulf, and slightly ahead of Dawson. In terms of grain quality, Hagberg is 247, so very similar to Champion and Beowulf, and not a problem there. Specific weight at 78.9, it's better than Beowulf, better than Champion, but not quite as high as Dawson, which does have a very high specific weight. Resistance to lodging with PGR is an 8, that's very solid, better than Champion and Dawson, same as Beowulf. And in terms of ripening, it sits at a +1, so fairly similar to the comparator, though it's not as early as Champion. Moving on then to pest and disease resistance. Scope has a 6 for mildew based on limited data, so that matches Beowulf, better than Champion but not as good as Dawson. Yellow rust it has a 7, so not as good as the comparators, but its brown rust is a 6, so that's better than Champion and Beowulf, they're not quite as good as Dawson. The Septoria of 6.5, it can't match Champion, but it's very similar to Beowulf and Dawson. Eye Spot is a 4, which is a bit lower than Beowulf and Dawson, but it matches Champion, and Fusarium is a 6. Untreated yield at 85%, It's the same as Beowulf, just below Champion, a little bit wet behind Dorsum, but it does have orange wheat blossom midge, which Dorsum hasn't got. There's the variety comments for you to look at. So in summary, for this year's new winter wheat, we have a new Group 1 from UKFM, bringing good disease resistance and untreated yields with good baking quality. And we await to see if UKM confirm that provisional Group 1 rating in the spring. We have several new UKFM Group 2 varieties with high yields, and one new Group 2 with good disease resistance and resistance to BYDV. We have two new Group 3 varieties with high yield potential and potential for distilling and export, a new soft Group 4 with a high yield and potential for distilling, and a new hard Group 4 variety with high yield and good disease resistance. Thank you for listening. There are other presentations for the other main crops on our website if you'd like to see those. Thank you very much.